Well, welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm Marcy Markusa, and we're talking tariffs again today. Steel and aluminum, 25%. And in Manitoba, that means that on the podcast today, we're going to take you to the city of Selkirk. This is Manitoba. So why Selkirk? Well, if you live here, then you likely know that hundreds of people go to work at the steel mill there each and every day. Today, we're going to have a conversation with the city's mayor now that all the steel heading to the States has a 25% tariff slapped on it. The mayor is Larry Johannson, and here's what he had to say about what people are thinking. Good morning, Larry Johannson.
Hey, good morning, Marcy. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. What's the chatter in Selkirk all about this at the coffee shops? And what are people talking about?
Well, it's not good. We've seen this in 2018, and it seems like we're reliving Groundhog Day by going through this again. We are not only Selkirk Steel Mill, but we're Manitoba Steel Mill. We represent the province here with steel and with steel exports. And this has been a very successful mill. It's well over 100 years old. It's had some retooling done to it, so it's green steel that comes out of that mill, which means it's environmentally friendly. It's made from recycled steel, so it's very, very important that it's not disrupted. We've got well over 500 employees that work in the steel industry in Selkirk. And ironically, for a community our size, the good news is that more people come to Selkirk to work than people leave Selkirk to work. So I think it shows between the steel mill and the provincial government how important this is to Selkirk.
Now, the Gerdau steel mill is what we're talking about, and then there's also two other manufacturers that are impacted here. When you talk about that number, I understand, of 500 people. When you say, can you elaborate a bit on what is made? Because I think some Manitobans may not realize, about the steel mill in Selkirk. What is actually made?
Yes, absolutely. So way back in the day, a few decades ago, it was mostly rebar that was made at the steel mill. And like I say, the Brazilian company that bought our steel mill owned a lot of other steel mills in this country and in the States and other countries. This steel mill had the opportunity to retool. They seen that their investment here was a good one. So now the steel that comes out of here, and we're looking at a lot of semi-trailers loaded with steel every day that comes out of here on its way to the U.S. as one destination. There's elevator steel that's made here. There's still rebar steel that's made here. The steel goes into a lot of construction, a lot of rebuilding. And just a fun fact, Marcy, to give you an idea of how far-fetching this steel goes, the highest building that was built in Dubai has Selkirk steel in it. So it just gives you an idea how far-reaching this is and how important it is to keep this important industry going.
Can it survive a 25% tariff? I mean, what happens?
Well, that's a question that's kind of the unknown right now. I know the 2018 tariffs, they lasted less than a year, which was good. They had no layoffs at the mill, which was also very, very good. I don't know. That was Trump also, and now here he is again. He's got quite a group with him this time around, so that really worries me. But I think one of the underlying things here, Marcy, is what is this doing to employees on both sides of the border? I mean, I've been watching this closely, and I don't think the American steel employees in the industry is any more happy with this than we are. And I wish these guys, when they're signing these executive orders and when they're having these discussions, I wish they would stop and think about the people they're impacting. There's retirees that could be 5-6 years away from retiring. They're worried about their pensions. There's people 40, 50 years old. If they lose their job, they're worried, can I get another job? Another job of the same caliber that I have. And then there's the young families that are working at these mills. And, they have young kids to raise and to put through school. And, I wish they would stop and think about the lives that they're impacting.
Just so I'm clear here, Mayor Johannson, what percentage of what's coming out of Selkirk Steel is going to the U.S.? Like, if you lose that market, how big of a deal is this? Obviously, it's massive, but what's the percentage?
Well, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. I did see a few numbers before, but I'm sure it's over 70% of the steel that goes into the U.S. But we also have to remember the steel, even if it's going to other countries or overseas, more than likely it's going through the U.S. also to be able to get to ships and that are going. So it's a big number. Canada,
it's part of the supply chain. Yeah, right.
Part of the supply chain. Yeah. Exactly. So Canada, this is a wake-up call for Canada, I feel, and this is just personal. This is just from me, Marcy, but I feel it's a bit of a wake-up call that it's not business as usual. Even if these tariffs come off, within a year or maybe within a few months, fingers crossed, we still have to look at doing business differently. We have to do more business interprovincial. We have to start thinking us first, Canada first. It's very, very important. I know people are talking now, buying local and being more patriotic, and I'm 110% behind that. And this is the time. You're wearing wake-up call.
You're wearing a hat around town. I heard that. What does it say on it?
Canada is already great. I got that hat a couple of years ago. In fact, it might have been back when the 18 tariffs were imposed, but I was on our beautiful waterfront in Selkirk at a Canada Day celebration, and a fella came up to me with a little bag, and he says, "Mr. Mayor, you don't know me, but," he says, "I like what you guys are doing in Selkirk, and I have bought you something." And it was this hat. And I didn't just throw it in the closet, Marcy. I wear it, the odd time. But right now, I'm in Fredericton on a conference, Sustainable Communities, which is ironic considering what we're going through. I have that hat here, and I wore it at the airport. I wore it on the plane, and I can't count how many people have said that hat is fantastic. That hat has been a lot of meaning to this.
Just as a last question, we have another interview coming up looking at sort of this angle. It'll lead us right into this in terms of what the province could do. But my question to you, I guess, as the mayor of Selkirk is, what would you like to see if these tariffs go, extend for some time here? Like, what would you like to see or need to see from the provincial and federal governments to support the steel industry?
Well, that's another good question. I mean, I have faith in our provincial government very much. I work closely with them. Premier Canoe and I consider ourselves, being able to talk freely. The ministers, we're able to talk freely with them. I respect them all. I guess I have to kind of leave it in the Premier's hands right now.
Fair enough.
I'm anxious to see what happens in Washington today. I know they're in Washington, and they're going to be talking about, to other industry leaders.
But what might be next?
As mayor of Selkirk and as mayor of the community that's got the, Manitoba steel mill, I'll call it. I've got a stake in the game. We've got a stake in the game here, so we all have to work together on this. And it's one of the most important things right now.
Thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for thinking of me, Marcy. Have a good day.
You too. That's the mayor of Selkirk, Larry Johannson. So, of course, as he's mentioning there, hundreds of people do come to work at the steel mill there every day. 3 businesses there employing some 500 people when it comes to steel. So now let's look at things from the provincial point of view. It's 9 minutes to 8 o'clock on 89.3 FM on CBC. And U.S. President Donald Trump is putting this 25% tariff on steel and aluminum. He signed the order yesterday. He said they would be imposed, quote, without exceptions or exemptions. And March 12th is the date that we're looking at here. So what can be done now? Let's talk to Jim Rondeau about it. He's a former NDP MLA and cabinet minister in this province. He spent 17 years in office. He was Minister of Science, Technology, Energy and Mines, among other files. But when the tariff threats started amping up, he wrote to CBC saying, quote, we need to expand our markets, similar to what Larry Johannson just said. But he also said we need to have the euro become the common currency of exchange versus the US dollar and identify 5 or 6 critical minerals that we ship to the States and stop this. And he's with us now via Zoom. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So let me walk through sort of some of the things that you said that you feel that we need to do to reposition. If we expand markets, not just across the country, but in Manitoba, where do we look to, in your view?
Well, I think what we have to do is look at where people need our critical minerals. And if you look at Europe, they've got a great auto industry. A lot of critical minerals and science and technology are developed and produced in Europe and Asia. I think what we have to do is look at all the people who are using it, our materials, end users, and then connect with them. And I think one of the interesting things is that this is not just an attack on Canada, it's an attack on our entire free trade system, on our fair trade system that was established 60 years ago. And we can't allow it to happen. And we being the entire world.
You talked about, when we're talking about minerals, you say we need to identify 5 or 6 critical minerals, just to repeat here, that we ship to the USA and stop this. We can pay the companies you wrote for the minerals and just keep them in storage. Can you sort of explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, there's some in minerals like tantalum. Tantalum is produced in Manitoba. It's a critical mineral, very rare mineral, and it's used in manufacturing of electronic devices. And it's needed. It's a critical mineral. Well, we have 5 or 6 of these. I found out when I was Minister of Mines, and most of them go straight to the United States. And then from there, they get produced into final products. I think what we do is we don't try to fight a bully by fighting up a bully on their own terms. I think what we have to do is look at our strengths. Our strengths are these critical minerals that can't be replicated. And so what we do is we say, we're going to stop these things, the 5 or 6 major critical minerals that Canada only produces, and stop them. There's other minerals like magnesium and other things that we have in an abundant supply that we could produce and ship to Europe. There's other materials that we, again, are a major supplier to the world. Well, what we have to do is say, how do we build our companies so that we're not landlocked and we go to Europe? Maybe we then develop Churchill better and start saying, okay, we are a trading nation. We shouldn't have 72% of all our products going straight to the US. We need to move forward. And I have huge faith in the government of Manitoba in moving Manitoba's interests forward in this. But we need help, and we need help from Canada, all the premiers, and most are on board, and we need help with other countries. We just cannot allow a bully to change the economics and abuse their allies, as is being done.
You talked also about establishing an export tariff on electricity, gas, and oil. You're talking about throwing all the measures really at the states right now. Is some of what your point of view is informed by, it sounds like, is repositioning ourselves with new markets is almost more critical than thinking about how to work through this tariff threat and stay in partnership with the United States?
I think one of the things this has told us is it's not the first time. It happened about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. It could happen again. I think what we have to do is figure out how all of our markets happen. And we can help people. We can help people in other countries by being more green. We could export more natural gas, which is much cleaner. It's basically the energy source for most of Japan that they use. And we have abundant of it, but it's landlocked. So what we have to do is look at our other markets. And we have to look at how we get all of these wonderful benefits that Canada has out to other markets. And so I think it's great now because everyone's talking about it. Everyone's talking about how we deal with this crisis. But I think when you have 72% of everything you produce go to one supplier, you're vulnerable. We have to diversify our markets.
Just as a last question, I understand you're surprised, was the language you used, that U.S. citizens aren't as concerned as Canadians about tariffs and rising costs for goods. What sense are you making of that?
Well, we just had a friend of ours come by in California, and there we were talking about the fires and the rebuild. And it was interesting because BC is the major supplier of lumber.
Yeah, they can't rebuild without Canada.
They can't rebuild without Canada.
Softwood builds the houses. Yep.
Absolutely. You're going to rebuild the houses, you need Canadian lumber. Well, if you add 25%, that affects not only California, but it affects all people because their insurance costs then go up. When the insurance costs go up to fix the houses and fires by 25%, that's going to affect every single person by increasing the insurance rates. It's going to affect the construction rates everywhere. And that's going to hurt the American people. It's going to hurt the Canadian people by losing jobs. I have never been in a situation where a person with huge amount of power looks to create a lose-lose situation instead of a win-win. I think we have to reach across the border and around the world to find win-win situations and get out of this. And that's why I said the euro. Maybe what we have to do is look to Europe and other Asian countries to find our allies.
Yep. We will
need a new world order.
We'll have to leave our conversation there in this uncharted territory and unprecedented time. But thank you for your time. Appreciate having you with us via Zoom.
Thank you and welcome again.
That is Jim Rondeau, former NDP MLA and cabinet minister in Manitoba. He spent 17 years in office, and he was Minister of Science, Technology, Energy and Mines, among other files. I'm Marcy Markusa, and this is Manitoba. Well, tariffs and trade and business are not the only big issues that we're talking about in the podcast of late, because we've also been talking a great deal about healthcare. You may have caught a previous podcast where we talked to a nurse. We concealed her identity. CBC News did to safeguard her job. But she's a nurse that has worked at the province's largest hospital, the Health Sciences Centre, for decades, including in the emergency department. CBC News talked to her for over an hour. I sat down with her for over an hour. And she told us about the constantly busy ER, the challenges of being surrounded by, as she described it, chaos. She said there were beds full of patients, some of them waiting for transfer to other care facilities, a waiting room with 30 to 60 people in it, others on stretchers lining the ambulance corridor. And there's also the houseless population that is so frequently in the ER, she called some of the people, quote unquote, regulars. Now, there was one day, though, where all was quiet in the HSC ER. January 17th, there was a blizzard in our province. If you live here, you might remember this. HSC went into code orange to prepare for patients that may be coming in due to traffic accidents. That's the day that it was all white out on the highways and there were pileups. Now, in the end, no one was diverted to the HSC ER, but the nurse said the preparation was magical.
I was so inspired by the teamwork that I saw, by the people that were coming and taking the patients, and we had so many social workers and transport, like everybody just came to help. We emptied out our department so we could take the new patients that may or may not be coming. And
where did all the people go, though?
I don't know. Some were discharged from our department, the people that were safe to discharge, but they just pulled them up. And I don't know if they pulled them in beds that were closed because they didn't have staff for those beds or what had happened, but it was like, wow.
Did they come back after them,
No.
some of the patients?
None of them.
Dr. Shawn Young is the Chief Operating Officer of the Health Sciences Centre and has agreed to speak to us specifically about what happens in a code orange situation, although he's bound by some confidentiality regarding the specifics of that day last month. He's here to walk us through things to see what we might glean to improve our system overall. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks for being with us. So first of all, when a code orange is called, who calls it and how long, before that call, when that call is made, how long before it actually impacts on the ground what's happening in the hospital?
Well, that's a good question. We have actually two different levels of code orange. There's a code orange alert, which is what was called that day, and then there's a full code orange. And the actions and mechanisms are a little bit different. But the code orange alert, which is what we did, it starts from the EMS group, the emergency services. They'll make the emergency room made aware, and there were a lot of very serious accidents that day, as we know. So we were expecting quite a lot of casualties. HSC is the province's hospital. We are the trauma center, so we have to be able to prepare ourselves for mass casualty events. So we do have mechanisms in place that allow us to clear out as quickly as possible. We start with incident command structure, so I'd be the incident commander, and we'd have operations chiefs, logistics chiefs, planning chiefs. We pull everybody off of their regular work, and we focus on one thing and one thing only, and that's creating capacity. But it's very disruptive to the rest of the site, of course, but it has a significant impact on the emergency department in terms of capacity. Mm-hmm. And what the nurse said, there were two. Magical is one thing I would say, and inspiring is also another thing I would say. It is inspiring to see how quickly people come together to create the capacity that we need when we need it.
She talked about, she was talking, you're talking about the number of different people involved there. She was specifically saying the teamwork involved, social workers and people coming down to make decisions. So all of those people would be already existing in the hospital doing other things. And as you said, you're pulling them out of other departments. Correct.
Yeah. So you're now focused on this one big event to create capacity for mass casualties to be able to support them, get them to the operating rooms, get them to the ICUs, get them to the MRIs and the CT scanners as quickly as possible. All the people doing all that coordination were doing other work already, which was facilitating patient transports, facilitating surgeries, and all that gets deferred. So we do impact a lot of patients as a result of these code oranges, but it is ultimately to create a safe pathway for mass trauma or mass casualty events.
I just wonder if there's lessons to be learned, though, because to move people that swiftly somewhere also was something that happened. So where did all the patients go? She was suggesting that maybe they went into, because there's not enough beds. We know this. So she said there are some wards that are shuttered because there's not enough staff to cover those wards. She wondered whether or not maybe the patients went to those beds just on a temporary basis or somehow. Can you, in a code orange, where do you move everyone physically?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, they didn't go to those wards per se, but what we can do is add other patients to an existing ward. We pull patients up into recovery rooms, for instance. We pull them up into non-traditional areas to be able to create that capacity. But it's very limited in its span because you can't do that indefinitely because we're already at almost 100% capacity daily. Ideally, a hospital wants to be 85-90% capacity so that you do have the ability to surge into those areas when you do need to quickly, as in a code orange or a code orange alert. But we've been really, really struggling with capacity over the last 4 or 5 years, as you know.
What about those who would have been in beds for longer stays? Because we learned that, sometimes there's stroke patients that end up presenting to ER, they're lower acuity, but they end up sort of stuck there because they can't get space somewhere else. I'm just curious if somebody was in an ER during a code orange in that situation, where would they go? Because the nurse said also that, at least on this day in January, no one came back to the ER.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question because there's things that we do as a site internally that we can do to create capacity very quickly. But then there's things that others can do to help us. So when we do call out a code orange, it's often a system response. It's not just the Health Sciences Center or the ERS system. So we make our other partners aware, other hospitals aware. When we look at some of our longest stays of admitted patients in the emergency departments that were quoted, these are the patients that were not waiting for a bed at the Health Sciences Center. They're waiting for a bed at one of the other lower acuity hospitals.
Yeah, someone for 300 days, the nurse was sharing, was the longest stay she recalled. 300 days in ER.
Yeah, we've had some of those patients a week longer. Yeah, they're not often, but it's disturbing enough. We don't want anybody waiting that long, but that's where your dependency on some of the other facilities comes into play. So when we call that code, we can actually sometimes get those patients into those facilities.
And what about if someone were there just for shelter or warmth? Would they be discharged in a code orange situation? Because it was also, it was quite, I'm going to use the word illuminating to understand that she said sometimes there'll be no one, she said 30 people could be in there and it could be all people there for shelter or warmth. So I'm just curious what the code orange is for that when you know that perhaps someone is not there for immediate medical attention.
Those patients aren't as directly impacted because it's more about clearing space in beds and in diagnostic areas and resuscitation bays and ICUs and surgery. It's not as much about people in the waiting room waiting for lower acuity care. We've seen such an increase in volumes of homeless and housing insecure people at the Health Sciences Center over the last 5 years. We've been measuring that. We've been presenting that to government as well in terms of how it's impacting the emergency department and the wait times and some of the safety events as well. So we've been working with our shelters to try and find out what it is that we need to be able to better support some of these folks that are coming 50 or 100 times a year to the emergency department. But that's ongoing work, but we are seeing a considerable increase in those volumes.
What do you do with that, though, in a code orange day then? She said some people would have been discharged from ER. Might that have been an example of someone with a lower acuity, and perhaps you suspected through conversation they were actually there more for shelter?
Yeah, they could. They probably had more social workers in there to be able to better link the people that needed different supports into the community back with the shelters. We did call in a lot of social workers directly into the ED to help match those needs.
So obviously, Dr. Young, all of this is leading us to wonder, you're talking about coordination, that the transfers happen swiftly in a code orange, that it is a system-wide response among hospitals, not just one space, not just HSC. What can be applied on a day-to-day basis that might help with the challenges that have been outlined?
Well, that's a really good question, too, because, code orange is one extreme example of what we can do to create capacity quickly. But we have surge protocols as well that are less extreme. They don't impact people's elective surgeries or cancer surgeries or things like that a code orange can. So we do have code orange protocols that we've recently expanded or expanding to 24/7. We've been running them during the day when all hands are on deck and managers and CRNs are all around. So we have been able to create a different type of surge to create capacity. It's not nearly as effective as a code orange because you're not disrupting nearly as many other patients. But it is one ability for us to create some capacity, in particular for the resuscitation beds. We have the Health Sciences Center. At the Trauma Center, we've got 6 resuscitation beds that are the most critical beds in the entire province to protect. And when those beds get full, that's when we start to get worried and start calling surges.
If clearing out the ER that swiftly, might not be achievable day to day because you don't have the staff, what does the actual staff number look like to make it achievable, like you were talking about, or does it lie, in your opinion, more in coordination of the system?
It's all coordination. Yeah, this is not about the number of people. You're pulling people that are already there off of different work to be able to help facilitate this. We don't have the ability to have a lot of extra people kind of hanging around waiting for an event like this. So you're pulling people off of other activities regularly when you're surging, but particularly the code orange is very disruptive.
What gets in the way from I'm just especially interested in the longer term stay folks in the ER that you said were, able to be moved pretty swiftly on in a code orange situation to other facilities because you have that system-wide coordination. Why doesn't that happen on sort of more of a day-to-day basis?
Well, those sites are struggling as well with capacity, so they're full, and we want to be able to get those lower acuity patients to them much quicker. But when they're full and there isn't capacity, then they have to get creative with their capacity when we have to move them quickly, as in a code orange, which they would have. Sometimes it means putting them in the emergency department or their urgent cares. But they're full as well. We're all struggling with the same challenges with a lot of patients in hospitals that we can't get them into their next phase of treatment, whether it's rehab or long-term care or home care. So all our hospitals are quite full of patients that don't actually need a hospital anymore. We call them ALCs, alternate level of care. And that number is not getting better, and that's a concern. So we do definitely need those services beyond the hospital to be beefed up.
What should I ask the Premier next week about this?
I think our biggest challenge, our staffing has been getting a little bit better. We've hired over 200 nurses over the last 2 years. That trend is getting better, same with allied health. I think our biggest challenge right now that the government can help us with is helping us with the home care, the long-term care. What is causing us the access block and the alternate level of care numbers to be so high? There's 25% of the patients at a health science center that have been there for over a month, many over 2 months, that need those facilities to be opened. So that's one big way they can help. And another big way they can help is better supports for the sheltered population so that they don't need an emergency room to be able to support their needs.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Marcy.
Dr. Shawn Young is the Chief Operating Officer of Health Sciences Centre. Well, I am Marcy Markusa, and on behalf of our whole team that puts This is Manitoba together, thank you for tuning in today. And don't forget to like and share.